All right, everybody, welcome back to West Coast Weekend, the marathon showcasing speedrunning talent of the West Coast. I am your West Coast host, SmoothOperative, and we are rolling right along in this marathon with our second run for the day, Star Fox Command by MHFsilver. Hey, Silver, would you like to introduce yourself in commentary?
Silver everywhere, and today I'm joined with Esoterics and Pottoww, other two runners of Command. If you guys want to say hi.
Hello.
Hello.
So in this game, Star Fox Command is actually a Nintendo DS game that's actually very different from all the other Star Fox games, where it's controlled both in a strategy game and the all-range mode. And I'm just going to warn people ahead of time, my webcam isn't going to be interesting to watch because I'm just going to be staring straight down for the most part. So let me know when everyone's ready for me to get started with this.
Yeah, whenever you are ready, we got you on the timer.
All right, and 3, 2, 1, go.
Good luck.
So Star Fox Command actually takes place right after the events of Star Fox Assault. Well, a little bit later than it. It takes place shortly after the entirety of the Star Fox team has separated and has gone their separate ways. So you start out the game playing as Fox. And at the beginning of the game here, we're introduced with the first new element of the game, the strategy map. Here, you control the characters by moving them on the touchscreen and drawing a path for them to move. What we're going to do at the start here is we're going to move up towards this little base that you see at the north air. And as we move, so the enemies on the map. So our first thing we're going to do is we're going to want to we're going to guide Fox over to the first base here. And when we engage with a base or an enemy, we then start the actual combat phase. In the combat phase, the game is entirely controlled by moving the touchscreen and touching literally any button on the DS itself. So we guide Fox by moving the touchscreen, and by pressing any button on the system, it acts as our fire button. And then once we shoot down the enemies, we can, the goal enemies that we have all drop little stars and targets that we need to collect. And those are displayed, all the enemies are displayed on the touchscreen, and we can barrel roll to pick up all of the stars that the enemies drop. Then once we are at a base, we need to take down the mothership, and we just fly through some rings and barrel roll straight into the enemy base to get rid of it. And so those are the key parts of every map are going to be these mothership areas, and then taking out every enemy. We have to clear out the entire map's enemies before we can advance to the next level.
At least all the enemies that would drop cores. The central component of any mission that you run into. The number of enemies in each group that you'll see on the mini-map here are all determined by the number of cores, and by collecting all of those cores, which you can see by the remaining 18 in the corner of the top screen, that's how we complete each mission.
And then when I draw a path, regardless if I go straight into an enemy, as long as my trail goes through their movement path, they will immediately get locked on to where I'm moving and start to follow me. So I want to ideally draw in the direction that they're going to be moving to try and convince them to follow me, making it easier for me to have them go where I want to go. So as you saw, I drew a line straight down and then had them come back up with me. And that was so I could pick them all up and then start moving towards the last base. And here, unfortunately, one of the bigger parts of Star Fox Command is the RNG that's created by the enemy spawns, and these guys are just flying around me. Every mission, you have a goal of how many targets you can take out, and they all spawn in various spots in the map. And these guys are just going to follow me. So I'm just going to, normally, I would want these guys to all spawn in a spot where I could just missile all of them and just drop a bomb on every single one of them. Didn't work out that way, unfortunately. But that's one of the bigger aspects of this speed run, is learning to adapt to the enemy spawns, because it's not always consistent. And then being able to optimize where you're going to go, how to get rid of them all, and how to spend as little time as possible actually in combat. So unfortunately, that one's a really slow one. And then as you saw, before every mission, it briefs us on what our target is. So we can use that to figure out where we need to move. In that previous mission, there was 12 targets. They're all clumped together, and you can use the touchscreen to tell where the target is based on clump size like that. If it's 12 and you see they're moving in groups, you know they're going to be, you know, a group of close targets on the touchscreen.
And being able to identify exactly where your enemies are is super important, because until you narrow it down to the last enemy with a core, the minimap doesn't tell you anything about like any differences beyond their movement patterns. You have to be able to study it closely in order to figure out exactly where you're going, because otherwise you'll get sent spinning in circles and that'll lose you a lot of time.
Yeah, unless there's only one enemy left, or one enemy in the stage in general.
Yep.
Yeah, if there's only one, the game points them out to you on the touchscreen, so you don't spend a whole time looking for one in a, like the needle in a haystack.
And in late game levels, it very much can become a needle in a haystack.
So the main enemy for each cluster or base is always going to stay the same throughout all runs. That's basically the only part that isn't randomized in this game. But what path they take on the overworld and what path they take inside of the actual level is basically RNG, and a very big part of what you have to consider when speedrunning this game.
So as you already saw in the previous base that got destroyed, whenever we have to take care of one of these motherships that are hanging out over these cities, you have to go full on Independence Day, ram into the thing while doing a barrel roll.
Yeah, and we have these little boxes that I'm flying through. I have to fly through every single one of them, otherwise the mothership will shoot us down.
Yes, which Rob very helpfully reminds you of every time you try to do it. And it loses you like 5 seconds each time, and it's awesome.
Yeah, it's real fun. This game, he likes to remind you every single time you do that.
Yeah.
And then, as you can see, I didn't point it out, we have a set amount of turns that you spend in every level, and you have to complete it under that certain amount of turns, and destroying a mothership gives you additional turns.
Yeah, the hope is that since we're doing a speed run and we're minimizing the amount of map movement, we should pretty much never be at risk of running out of turns. But in a casual playthrough, especially on some of the more expensive stages, it can become an issue if you're not careful.
And then, as someone that, if people in the chat might have played Star Fox Command, you might be aware the game has various endings. So the path we took was to actually go and have Fox try to figure out what happened to Falco. And so we now switch over to playing as Falco. And during the same events that's happening to Fox, we're now playing as Falco to figure out what's been happening with him at the same time. And then at this first enemy that I'm at in this mission, what I'm actually going to need to do is I want to kill everything on the screen. If you look down at the touchscreen, you can see there aren't too many enemies on this map. And that's actually a good thing, because if we clear an entire screen of enemies, get rid of every single enemy on the map, then we actually get rewarded with a bonus of 1 additional bomb. And the bombs are what can be used to kill enemies without having to actually fight them. So I almost picked up the star on accident, so we're gonna avoid that. And using bombs to kill enemies instead of actually fighting them becomes pretty crucial later on when the map starts to get flooded with enemies.
The RNG here is actually super unfortunate. If you get the correct spawn, you can spawn with as few as 4 enemies total, not just cores, enemies total, on this particular map. And you can knock this out in like a matter of seconds and just have an extra missile that you get as a reward for a perfect clear. Because those missiles, as we'll see, will just avoid entire combat segments.
I also got like some of the worst enemies to deal with in here as well. Usually there's like some like spiders that swim along the water. Did not get those guys. I got the more annoying to destroy enemies.
Yes.
Okay, so now I've destroyed everything, so I can finally actually advance out of here. That was really bad luck. The ideal situation would be only 4 enemies, and the only enemies that aren't the targets are just like water spiders. which are just super easy to get rid of. And then as you see there, perfect reward was to get an additional missile. And then I'm going to use that. If I drag off the Great Fox and onto enemies, I can then start to missile them and get rid of them instantly. So that way we save time because I don't have to actually fight them. And we get rid of huge clusters of enemies. And now once I get rid of those...
Yeah, there are also some enemies in this game that you really don't want to fight in a speedrun because all different kinds of enemies in the levels have different amounts of health points or ways to counter your attacks. There are, for example, some enemies that come in huge clusters and they don't respond well to bombs within the levels. So you have to be careful on what enemies you actually bomb when amount of bombs is an issue, basically.
Yep. Sometimes you have to be worried about enemies that are on cycle-based patterns too, like the flip ships that were being fought in the last level. They'll fly directly at you, and while they're flying at you, your bullets just bounce off of them. So you have to wait for them to come at you and then spin around. And usually we want to avoid other enemies that have similar patterns because some of them aren't so nice about revealing their weak points quickly, which can make them a pain to take out.
And these guys that I'm fighting right now are a huge pain because they go in straight lines and then start to get crazy once you get close enough to them. And as you might have noticed, the characters in this game actually have different stats. So depending on who you're playing, their busters are a little bit better than others. Some of them are weaker, some can actually lock on, some cannot. Falco is probably one of the more geared towards multi-targets. His buster isn't really strong, but he actually can lock on to multiple enemies, so it allows his lock-on shot to hit a ton of enemies at once. The trade-off is that he has very low health. And again, that was also not very lucky. Those are the enemies I hate the most, those guys, because they are a pain to lock on. They are a pain to actually shoot down because they get really crazy when you get close to them.
Yeah, the lock-on system in this game too is a bit unique among other Star Fox titles. Usually you just hold the button down to lock on and then you move your cursor over it and it just happens. In Command, you have to level up the amount of damage that your lock-on does by holding the cursor over the enemy for an extended period of time. So not only is the ship kind of difficult to pilot because using touchscreen for controls it takes some getting used to. It's also tricky because you have to be holding your target cursor over them for a long period of time, and then it ticks up over and over again until you can unleash one very powerful blast. But if they leave your screen, like those erratically moving disco balls on the last stage can do, it can become a pain.
And then here's an example of a character that can't lock on. Bill lacks the ability to lock on, has a fair amount of health, but has a mediocre shot, and then has like no boost.
We really would go out of our way to not use Bill unless the specific situation calls for it, where he randomly spawns in on the opposite side of the map and just happens to be next to the base that we need to get rid of.
So I completely missed that first box, so because of where it started and where I started, so I got shot down by the mothership, which is fine because I messed up this anyway. So we're gonna lose. This is ideally not how this would go at all, but we're just gonna keep rolling with it.
To hit the mothership, you actually have to barrel roll into it, and the easiest way to start a barrel roll is before you actually go into the hatches, or no, the hatches, the squares. And doing a barrel roll, you can only do that by actually drawing a circle on the screen as well, so it can interrupt your movement.
Yeah.
And then here's our first example of a missile. We just chase these guys down and have to follow the same boxes and then just destroy the missile. They're mostly just a waste of time. They don't really do anything. They don't really pose a threat. They're literally just a waste of time.
Yes, because unfortunately, we can't shoot down their missiles with our missiles, as cool as that would be. Also fortunate, though, is that their missiles don't just happen instantly and destroy the Great Fox right away. We have a chance to shoot them down.
Oh yeah, I guess we never actually spoke about that. The whole point of every mission is actually to protect the Great Fox.
Yes,
So-
that is the quickest way to get a game over, is to allow enemies to get to the Great Fox, because then, poof, whole mission goes bye-bye. One way to lose the mission is to run out of turns, like we mentioned before. Another way is that you can potentially run out of lives. And the last way is anything even barely touches the Great Fox, it goes up in flames.
Yeah, the Great Fox cannot take any damage whatsoever. Even if it's a single, one enemy, that will destroy it. We can't allow any sort of damage to come to it. And then because I ended up wasting a turn, now I have to get rid of this one last missile that got fired.
Which usually isn't too hard of a task with a character like Falco who can lock onto enemies. Unfortunately, having to shoot down missiles with characters without lock-ons, such as Bill, and in other runs, other characters too sometimes lack it, and that can be kind of a challenge.
Yeah, some characters are like a ton better at shooting down missiles than others, and characters like Bill that can't lock on just are inherently so much worse. And in other categories where you would have multiple people, you would try to have characters that can't lock on never interact with missiles.
Yeah, everyone has their strengths and weaknesses, and you just have to kind of set them up for success. Among the other things that can differ from character to character, in addition to blaster shots, are their health pool, their amount of boost, the amount of resources that they have in terms of bombs. And those all can match up nicely with different enemy groups. So if you've got an enemy group that has a lot of potential cores to collect, then sending in a character with multiple bombs is a great idea.
And then here's normally what I would do is at the beginning of this mission, we would want to reset until a specific base on the mission was preparing a missile to be fired. Because I got it first try, I don't have to reset the map to do it. And then this is another one where I'm going to want to shoot down everything, because that will give us another bomb to use.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, this one...
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, this one is a little bit different, because this one almost always is going to have a ton of enemies on it.
Yeah, so the reason why you would get rid of all the enemies on a mission like this is because it just takes so darn long to take care of the basic and core-based enemies anyway. These snails that float around in midair are the kind of fight that we would want to skip with the missile if we were able to, but base battles can't be skipped in this way. So instead, we're stuck fighting these cycle-based snail enemies, and as long as we have to wait for them to open up anyway, we might as well go around the map and take out everything else so that there's another fight that we can skip later. Come on, any year now.
And we can also, even though their core isn't showing, we can still lock onto them. So while we're on the approach to them, we would want to lock on and try to get a max charge shot before they even open.
Awesome, so 1 base down, 3 to go. Or 2 to go.
And so we get a perfect, we get another free bomb out of it. And this will start to show the process of actively avoiding every fight, because now I won't be fighting the clusters that show up here anymore. If Great Fox wants to work with me. And then another thing is, when you clear out a base and get rid of a mothership, the actual base itself remains on the map. However, you get to use it as an additional boost towards your movement. So you can move off of a base to get a little bit extra movement ability on the actual map itself.
Yeah, depending on the category that you're running and the stage that you're on, there can be a lot of finesse involved in getting a nice line that doesn't sway too much, and it's just perfectly straight so that you can cover exactly the distance you need to. You have to be a good artist to be a good Star Fox Command Runner.
Yeah. It's a lot trickier than it seems like, because the game is also very finicky about the lines you draw, especially if you're like close to the edge of the map. The game gets really picky about where you're drawing.
Yeah.
And then the enemies I'm fighting right now start out clumped and then disperse once you start to shoot them. And then once dispersed, they can become a pain, because they can also barrel roll and just get rid of your damage.
Yeah, if you've ever used good old PictoChat on the Nintendo DS Lite, you know exactly how hard it is to draw straight lines on a Nintendo DS screen. It is incredibly picky.
You can kind of cheat it in a way by pointing at 2 spots on the gamepad right away, which would theoretically be able to create a 100% straight line. But that's also very time-based and I would say not reliable to do.
Either way, you're trying to trying to make the best of a bad situation in that regard. But fortunately, there aren't too many situations where you have to do that, and it's pivotal to the run. But sometimes you got to look out for that. Speaking of tough drawing situations, on the left side of the screen, we're going to get another ally. And flying through these asteroid fields, the game deliberately decides it's going to mess up your pathing. So it might take a couple of attempts to make sure that you get in range of the missile here.
Yeah, if you go through the if you go through an asteroid belt, it like really screws up your movement. So it didn't grab that first missile.
Yeah, so this is, as we said, one of the ways to fail. That's unlucky. If you just touch the missile at all, you would actually be able to fight it, because as soon as you touch it, it stops it in its path.
Yes. All of the other enemies in this game will follow your movement and track it as you move across their aggro range, but in this particular case with the missiles, they just stop you exactly where you are. And in this case, one of the missiles stopped Silver from being able to intercept the other missile.
It's still the asteroid cluster that's right there is very annoying to deal with as well, because sometimes it can seem like you're actually drawing a line that's gonna reach, but it's like very slightly moving left and forth and up and down, so it takes longer for your ship to actually reach the point that you hoped for. So I would consider that a semi-random aspect of this, especially this level as well. I have had runs die to that as well.
Yeah, it's a real tricky thing, because it's really hard to gauge if you're truly actually getting to the missile because of the asteroid field just messing up the actual path. But you know, where would the fun be if a marathon run went well, right?
Everything that can go wrong, right? Always that good.
I mean, we need to show them the death screen.
Yeah, that's true. And because we're restarting it, of course, I need to perfect this map again.
Yep, everything, including your resources, basically just resets to the way it was before you got to the level in the first place. So, routes will be pretty much the same.
Yeah, but due to the massive amount of RNG in this game, expecting to finish several runs in a row close to each other is highly unrealistic. The world record for this game is actually very good when it comes to RNG, but even the world record can still drop down up to a minute, I would say. But having such perfect RNG is a very difficult task to achieve.
the tough ass
Yeah.
for sure.
It's definitely a game that if you want to get to the highest level, your reset count is gonna skyrocket.
Worth mentioning though is that we are talking a lot about the RNG aspects of this game, but when it comes down to it, it comes down to your basic skill in handling the RNG in a proper way, because it's RNG, but it's often not RNG that you can do nothing about. It just makes you have to change the way you handle the game, basically.
Yes, which
Yeah.
makes longer runs actually a whole lot of fun because suddenly bits and pieces of time save bits and pieces of time loss that are unavoidable don't seem so big, and instead you're just constantly focused on making those adjustments.
Yeah, a lot of this speed run comes down to taking what looks really bad and having to make the best of it, which you could say about like a lot of games and a lot of runs that are RNG based. But this one, because especially with the 80% being so low, you really have to be able to figure out how to adapt to it immediately.
Yeah, 100% is definitely the most optimized category in this game at the moment. Basically due to its length. There are categories in this game that are 3 times as long, basically.
Yeah, because the game does have, for the people that don't know, this game has a ton of different endings. And so some of the endings can get pretty long. This one is 80% because it is the shortest category, or it's the shortest ending.
Yes, only 4 missions, whereas some of the categories can get up to, I think, 9. Can get pretty long.
So this time I actually had the missiles, so we should be in a much better situation this time. And then Kat here, Kat's actually pretty good. The trade-off for Kat is she has pretty good buster, she has pretty decent charge. She just has little health and a little boost.
But fortunately, while chasing down a missile, you can't run out of boost because it gives you infinite right at the beginning.
Yes, every square, as soon as you hit a square, basically your boost does not drain anymore.
Yes.
There also is one of the only glitches that we actually know in this game that calling it a glitch might be a
bit of a stretch.
Yeah, but you can actually start your boosts before the level actually starts in the cutscene in the beginning, but it's very... We haven't really tested out how it works, but we believe that it's due to a small window where you can actually double tap the screen and it actually registers as a move. But that's also one thing that is not reliable at all to get consistent, because you just have to mash and pray for the best.
Yeah. So we've talked before about how you control basically every movement of your ship besides firing shots with the touchscreen. And so normally hitting a window of a couple of frames in a speedrun, it's tricky, but it happens all the time. The problem here is that the timing that needs to be hit is the second tap of the touchscreen, which suddenly adds, many more degrees of complications to it. And at this moment, the best method we know for trying to get it is just to mash and hope that the boost ends up happening. Because if it does, then that's a free few seconds of time save.
Exactly.
Yeah,
unfortunately, the touchscreen doesn't allow for spoon strats.
All right, and then we're coming up on the final mission, and this one does a good job at showcasing just the missiles and the bombs we've been collecting and how useful they are for actually dodging everything.
Yeah, I do love this mission.
It's very satisfying that after all that hard work of getting up a nice stockpile of missiles, you basically just go through this mission and immediately wipe the whole map. So story-wise, because story has been happening, even though we've been skipping all of it, Falco's been heading around the asteroid field, Sector X, Y, Z, all of them, and at this point, he's ran into an old foe of Pigma Dengar, who at this point should be dead. But as we all know, in Star Fox, nobody ever stays dead, so here he is, back again.
because this does take place after the events of Assault, and Pigma is one of the only Aperoid victims that dies in Assault, he's technically dead. So this is Pigma's, as you might have saw by the title, this is his revenge, trying to get back at the Star Fox team for actually getting rid of him.
Or in this case, just Falco. Because
just
everybody
Falco.
else is off doing useful things. Not that taking care of some sort of intergalactic giant space pig bent on revenge isn't a useful thing to be doing with our time.
And then Cat shows up once more.
And this last enemy is gonna get real close to the Great Fox.
Yeah.
Dangerously close, knowing that it is indeed paper mache.
All right.
And there goes the final mission of this speedrun. And then the final missile, I mean.
Yep.
Of the final
Yeah.
mission.
We won't, even as you might have saw, I picked up a missile, so this last enemy is just gonna get rocketed from like 5 feet away. And now Pigma's fed up with sending his troops towards us, so now he's going to fight us himself. And we're gonna pick Cat into this fight because Cat is much better. And in this fight, Pigma has 4 faces. He's just a cube. And what we need to do is we need to match every side of the cube to be Pigma's face. And we want to avoid matching anything other than Pigma's face.
Each colored side of these cubes matches up with a certain attack pattern. And if you match up all the cubes with anything other than this one, Pigma does not become vulnerable, and he'll use that attack on you instead. So the green attack of these missiles usually isn't too threatening. You can just boost past them. Most of Pigma's attacks, in fact, are not incredibly worrying, except for one in particular, which is what happens if you line up all of the yellow. Because the sheer damage output of that attack is insane. Pretty much unparalleled by, like, anything else I can think of in the game. So hopefully, yep, I'll go with the red attack instead.
And then time's coming up here in a minute. So with that, Pigma's defeated. You can 2-cycle him, but it's like super, super difficult. So
Yeah, that was a really solid fight.
Yeah, 2-cycle is perfect, 3-cycle is good. And then
Yep, that was a good
time
fight.
is now. So with that, that's the any percent for Star Fox Command done. I did unfortunately go overestimate, but that, I mean, for how bad the run could go, that was actually pretty solid in my opinion. And with Pigma being destroyed, we get one of the endings where Falco realizes that the entirety of the remainder of Star Fox got together and beat the main threat of the game and left him behind. So he got upset that he was left behind. Kat mentions that Falco should stop moping and do something about it. And so instead of trying to figure out why they left him behind, Falco decides to make his own rival team and teams up with Kat and Dash Bowman, who is related to Andros, and they create a new team.
Star Falco.
Yep. And then that's just one of the, 9 endings this game has?
That's probably one of the endings that makes the most sense for this game, to be honest.
Yes, it gets very weird very fast depending on how far into the rabbit hole you want to go.
Yeah, there's some pretty weird ones.
Very unlucky with the failure on the third mission there, but I guess that proves our
point a bit there.
Yeah, it proves our point about this game being heavily RNG dependent. Overall, very solid run. Very
Yeah, I
happy to see it.
I wouldn't worry too much about things like that out of your control, and it's pretty chilled out marathon here, so you're totally fine. Thank you so much, Silver, for speedrunning that for us.
Yeah, it's really cool to be able to show off this game, which doesn't get a whole lot of attention. In fact, I'd actually highly recommend people check out all of the Star Fox speedruns. You guys have really been missing out on something if you don't. So if you're interested, I would check out speedrun.com/star_fox and give all of them a watch. I highly recommend it.
The Star Fox series is definitely a very technical series.
Yeah, very technical speedruns. But yeah, so I want to thank everyone for having me here. I want to thank Esoterics and Pottoww for actually joining me on the commentary. I really appreciate you guys being here.
Glad to help.
Oh. Well, thank you very much, Silver, for running. And everyone watching, if you did enjoy that run, please make sure you follow Silver at twitch.tv/MHFsilver. Up next, we have Animaniacs, and we will return in a moment.